Hello Year 5 and welcome to your RE lesson, so your second lesson or third lesson or first lesson depending which order you're doing these in. So we're going to have a look at the baptism story of John the Baptist. So we're carrying on with our stories of Christianity that we've been looking at this term. So we've looked at parables, we've looked at different stories, we've looked at the elements of the two parts of the Bible. So today we're going to be continuing on with the same unit of work that we're doing. There's going to be a lot of reading in this today, so I'm going to be reading through the story. If you want to pause the video and have a go at reading the slides yourself, that's perfectly fine. Obviously, I don't want to overload you with you trying to read and listen to me at the same time, so I will leave that up to you, okay? So, what I want you to do first is I want you to just pause the video and have a think about these two questions. So, have you ever seen anyone get baptised before? And do you know what the word baptism means? Okay, so think about whether you've maybe seen it in a movie, on a TV show, if you've actually been to someone's baptism before. It could be a baby, a cousin, a sibling that's had it done before. And just have a think of what happens at a baptism and what it means to be baptised. So just pause the video and have a think. Okay, so baptism is a Christian rite of passage. So it's like a pathway, an entry into the Catholic Church, or the Christian Church. Same for both. And it involves water being used as a symbol of purification and regeneration, so that idea of sort of being born into the family. Now, in some churches, babies are baptised to welcome them into the family. Obviously, babies don't have a choice at that point in time, so that'd be a parental consent that's given to welcome that baby into the family and into the church. Now, the holy water is placed in what's called a baptismal font. So a font is what you put the water in, okay, and the baby's leaned over, and then water from a priest or a minister is then sprinkled on the baby's head and a prayer is said. So that's how babies are baptised, but then if you're an adult, it looks slightly different. And no, before any of you ask, they're not going swimming, okay? I understand where some of you might think that's the case, but in other churches where baptism is used for people who are old enough to actually understand what it is that they want and whether they want to become a Christian, they're then baptised in a slightly different way. So an adult baptism involves that person being totally immersed in the water, so put under completely from head to toe. And it's either done in a baptismal pool, so it looks like a swimming pool, but it's fairly small, obviously it's blessed water, or outside in the lake or sea. And obviously, again, that's carried out by someone that's either a priest or a minister that then carries out that service as well. So, I just want you to bear this question in mind before I have a read of the story. So why do you think Christians do this, and where do you think the tradition comes from? Okay, now I've sort of given it away a little bit from the story of John the Baptist, but I think from previous conversations, not a lot of you have heard of this story. So I just want you to bear that question in mind, and let's see what the story's like. So we're going to read the story. It's about a man called John. He actually becomes known as John the Baptist. Okay, he was the first person within the Bible to actually perform the rite of baptism. Okay. So we're going to have a read of this story to see what it was that made him so special and how it becomes such an integral part of the Christian faith today. So like I said, if you want to pause the video, if you want to read it on your own, that's perfectly fine. You can just follow along as we go. If not, you can listen to me read as well. So during the rule of King Herod of Judea, there lived a priest called Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. Now they'd both wished for a child, but had never been blessed with any of their own. Now, they were old and had lost hope of ever having a baby, but nonetheless, they were both very righteous people and followed all of God's commandments. Now, one day, Zechariah was in the temple performing his duties when an angel of the Lord appeared to him. When Zechariah saw the angel, he was overcome with fear, so he panicked. "Don't be afraid," the angel said. "Your prayers have been heard and your wife will have a baby. She will give birth to a son, and you will call him John. John will prepare the way for the Lord and will lead people back to God." "But how can this be?" asked Zechariah. "Elizabeth is too old to have children." But the angel said, "I am a messenger of God, and these things will happen. However, as you did not believe, you will remain silent, unable to speak until the day these things happen." So basically, he's going to become muted until it actually happens. So when Zechariah left the temple, he actually tried to tell people outside what had happened, but like it had been predicted, he couldn't speak. And that's when people realised, well, he must have seen a vision from the temple. And just like the angel said, Elizabeth had a baby boy. And everyone rejoiced and celebrated that they'd finally had a child, and they wanted them to name the baby Zechariah after their father. But Elizabeth refused. And of course, named her son John. Now, when she was pregnant with John, a relative of hers called Mary was also visited by angel. Now, you may know who Mary is. And Mary was told that she would have a baby, even though she was not yet married to Joseph. Now he sounds like another person that we know of. Now he would be a very special baby, and his name would be Jesus. So we know all about the birth of Jesus and the Christmas story. And Jesus and John the Baptist were born 6 months apart. So they became a very integral part of the Bible. So John grew up to be a man of very strong character, and instead of serving in the temple like his father, he lived in the desert where he wore clothes of camel hair with a leather belt around his waist. He ate locusts and wild honey, and his only wish was to help people get ready for what was going to happen. Now, to everyone he met, he said, "Change your heart and your minds. Here comes the kingdom of heaven." And he wanted people to realise that Jesus was soon coming, and they should be ready. So he encouraged people to turn away from doing bad things and to turn back to God. Now that comes across a lot of the stories in the parables that we read about this idea of people going off on the wrong path and then coming back again. So when we looked at the parable of Jesus and the sheep, and the idea of that one sheep that got lost out of the 100 sheep that he had. We've got the story of the Good Samaritan. There were always people that were judged for being different, and judged for going off on that wrong path. So John realised this and started baptising people in the River Jordan. Now he baptised people who had turned away from their old ways and recognised they'd done wrong. So the idea of the baptism is they wanted to be right in God's eyes, so they would then be washed clean by the baptism so they could start their lives again. Now, a very common theme in a lot of the parables we've read before is the Pharisees didn't always like what other people were doing. They didn't like people that were religious and didn't like people going about and making up their own rules. So some of the Pharisees didn't like what John was doing, and they asked, "Well, are you the Messiah?" And he replied, "I am not." So they said, "Well, then why are you baptizing people?" And John answers, "Well, I baptize with water. There is one coming who is greater than me, and I am not worthy to even untie his sandals." Now, when Jesus was ready to start his public mission, so this is when it was then written in the Bible from his disciples, he went to John at the River Jordan. Now, lots of people were listening to John talk, and when Jesus reached the river, he asked John to baptize him. Now, at the time, John didn't recognize Jesus, and he baptized him as he'd asked, and as he did so, he saw the Holy Spirit coming down from heaven like a dove and resting on Jesus. And all of a sudden, when John saw this, he suddenly realised who Jesus was, and this man was the Messiah. Okay, he's the person he'd been waiting for. He was God, he was the Lord, he was the person that was going to change everything. And over the next few days, he told his followers who Jesus was. And then some of these people started to follow Jesus, and this is how Jesus came to have his first disciples. And obviously the first disciples were the people that started writing the 4 chapters of the Holy Bible. So we know that John was set out to have a very special mission from God. And obviously, instead of thinking of himself as a very important man because he'd been approached by an angel and had a message from God and had a journey, he actually lived a very simple life, despite the fact he'd been privileged with this responsibility. He actually made it abundantly clear to people that someone much more important was coming, and it wasn't just for him. So just want you to have a think. What role do you think baptism played in making sure people were ready for the coming of Jesus? So why was it important? What was the aim for it? Just pause the video and have a think. Let's hope no one saw the bottom part of that slide there. They gave it away. So the rite of baptism is actually symbolic, okay? Now, we've looked at symbolism before, and we've looked at a lot of this actually in our Christian story unit that we've been looking at with the idea of parables. We've looked at analogies, which is one story that's used to describe the moral of another story. And we've looked at the morals, and we've looked at lessons from the Good Samaritan. We've looked at lessons that have been learnt from those stories. So the water is symbolic, it's metaphoric, because it's that idea of washing away your old life and being born again into the new life with God. Now, obviously, with us, we don't wash our sins away. It's not something that makes us physically dirty, but it's the idea of cleansing your soul. So you're washing your soul. However, different churches actually have different ways of baptizing people, and there's different types of church within the Christian faith, okay? And they've got very different customs and traditions of how they go about the baptism, and that's going to be your job today to find out what those similarities and differences are, okay? So you're going to be completing this Venn diagram. I've done Venn diagrams before. We did this in science way back, for September, when we had the hoops out on the tables. We had to separate our materials based on their properties, and any that crossed over into that little circle in the middle meant that they were the things that were similar. So you're going to be looking at the Anglican faith, Anglican baptism and the Baptist baptism. So if you don't have a printer at home, that's fine. I'm sure if you've got pen and paper, you can very easily draw this. So anything about the Anglican baptism is going to go in this circle here, and anything for the Baptist baptism is going to go in this circle here. If you find any similarities between the two, they are going to go in that inside circle, okay? Now, I sent an information sheet home with you as well, so I'm expecting you to know this off by heart, okay, or to magically know the answers or go and Google any of it. But I have sent an information sheet home with this as well to help you, okay? So set out the Venn diagram into your book, have a read of the activity sheet. If you are able to print it and have a pencil or a highlighter at home, great, you can highlight some of the key information. If you want to do some extra research to see if you can think of any more similarities or differences, by all means. But all I want you to do is have a go at that Venn diagram and use the worksheet to help you. And this will then nicely lead on to our next diary lesson that we'll look at next week as well. So give it a go and see how you get on. All right, and good luck, Year 5.